The instant the lawyer read the will, the atmosphere in the room shifted, turning frigid with tension. I had barely begun to absorb the weight of losing my grandfather when my mother rose to her feet, her fingers tightening possessive around her husband's arm. With unwavering confidence, she declared, "From this moment forward, Richard will be running the company." I blinked. Richard? My stepfather, the man my mother had hastily married less than a year ago. The same man who had spent the last 6 months casually slipping in condescending remarks, insinuating that I was too young, too inexperienced to handle anything of real significance. I scanned the room. No one flinched. Not my aunts, not my uncles, not even the board members who were present. It was as if this had been orchestrated long before my grandfather's passing, as if my mother's decree was nothing more than the final confirmation of an unspoken agreement. But there was one glaring flaw in her little announcement. I own the company. Now, a week before the funeral, I sat beside my grandfather's hospital bed, my hand carefully wrapped around his frail fingers. His skin, once strong and sure, now felt fragile as parchment. "Elle," he whispered, his voice dry and weak. "You're the only one I trust." The words cut through me like glass. A lump swelled in my throat, and I struggled to keep the tears at bay. My grandfather had always been my rock, the one person who saw my worth when no one else did. My mother, on the other hand, never missed an opportunity to remind me of how I failed to meet her expectations. Grandpa's grip tightened, just slightly, but enough to convey the urgency in his words. "Don't let them take what I built." I didn't fully understand what he meant at the time, but now, sitting in this room, with every set of eyes silently watching me, I finally did. "They'll come for it," Grandpa had warned. "And when they do, don't be afraid. I've made sure you're ready." At the time, I hadn't fully grasped the weight of his words. Not until now. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses with practiced precision. My mother sat poised, waiting for the inevitable validation of her claim that her husband, Richard, would be the new head of Whitmore Industries. But instead, the lawyer turned to me. "According to Mr. Whitmore, as will his entire estate, including all controlling shares in Whitmore Industries, is to be inherited by his granddaughter, Elle Whitmore." The silence that followed was absolute. I felt it before I saw it. Every gaze in the room locking onto me, the weight of their shock pressing in. "That must be a mistake." My mother snapped, her voice sharp, brittle. She sat rigid, refusing to accept what she'd just heard. "He meant to leave it to me." The lawyer didn't so much as blink. "I assure you there is no mistake," he said evenly. "Elle Whitmore is the sole heir, effective immediately. She owns everything." Richard was the first to react. A soft chuckle at first, then a full, bemused laugh. He turned toward me, shaking his head like I was a child playing make-believe. "Sweetheart, come on," he said, his tone thick with condescension. "You know, running a business isn't like some school project. It requires real experience." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Then, as the realization settled in my mother's face, twisted into something far uglier than disbelief. Rage. "If that's how it is," she hissed, "then get out. Leave our house." I met her glare, then tilted my head slightly. "Our house." A slow smirk pulled at my lips before I could stop it. I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "You mean Grandpa's house?" I corrected. "You might want to take another look at that, will Mom? Because I have a feeling there's more bad news waiting for you." The silence that followed stretched unbearably thick, with barely restrained fury. My mother's hands curled into fists at her sides, her lips pressing into a bloodless line, as if she was physically holding back the urge to scream. Richard, standing beside her, flicked his gaze between me and the lawyer, his once assured confidence finally cracking. I had expected a fight. I just hadn't expected them to unravel this quickly. I hadn't expected them to lash out this fast. "You're joking." My mother finally spat, her voice barely above a whisper but seething with fury. "Grandpa would never do this. He would never leave you in charge over me." The lawyer didn't flinch. He calmly straightened his stack of papers before meeting her glare. "Mr. Whitmore was explicit in his wishes. Elle is the sole heir to his estate, his home, his assets, and full ownership of Whitmore Industries." The weight of his words settled over the room like a bombshell. Even I needed a second to process it. I had expected to inherit the company, but the house, the entire estate, everything. The same realization must have struck my mother at that moment, because her expression darkened, shifting from disbelief to something far colder. "If that's how it is," she said, her voice, "then you are no longer welcome here." She lifted her chin, eyes devoid of warmth. "Pack your things and leave immediately." A thick silence followed for a beat. I almost thought I misheard her. Had she really just kicked me out of my own home? I let out a slow breath, fighting back the laugh, threatening to escape. She had no idea how deep she had already lost. "Mom," I said, tilting my head, "I think you're confused." I gestured around the grand estate, my voice casual, almost amused. "This house, it's mine now. Grandpa left it to me." Her face twitched, as if the reality of it all had physically struck her. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "This is our family home." I met her glare head-on, my tone unwavering. "And now I'm the only legal family member who owns it." A muscle in her jaw clenched. Richard, standing stiffly beside her, took that moment to step in, forcing a carefully rehearsed smile. "Oh, sweetheart," he started, his voice dripping with feigned concern. "You're young, running a company of this magnitude. It's not just about inheritance. It's about responsibility." It was their real plan. This was never about family. It was about control. They had counted on my mother inheriting everything. She was supposed to sign over the company to Richard, placing him in power, while she enjoyed the wealth. But now the only thing standing between him and Grandpa's empire was me. And he actually thought he could manipulate me into handing it over. I crossed my arms, leveling him with a steady look. "Let me get this straight. The moment you realized the company wasn't yours, Mom tried to throw me out of my own home," I said, my voice calm but cutting. "And now you expect me to believe that you and Richard should be the ones in charge? Do I look that gullible?" Richard's face darkened, though he forced that same practiced, insincere smile. "That's not what I'm saying at all," he murmured, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "I wasn't interested in his damage control. Actually, I think I understand perfectly." I cut in my voice. "Steady. You both assumed Grandpa would leave everything to Mom. You were probably already planning the handoff. She signs it over and Richard runs the show. But Grandpa saw straight through you." I let the words hang for a beat before finishing. "That's exactly why he left it all to me." The impact landed like a slap. My mother's expression twisted her mask of cold control, slipping with a sharp crack. She slammed her hand against the table, her voice laced with frustration. "Oh, you have no idea what you're doing," she snapped. "This isn't some personal victory. It's $1 billion corporation. You can't run something this massive just because you got lucky with an inheritance." I didn't flinch. The lawyer, who had been quietly observing, finally cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses before speaking. "Actually, Mr. Whitmore anticipated these concerns," he said evenly. My mother's head snapped toward him. "What does that mean?" she demanded. He didn't so much as blink. "It means Mr. Whitmore put a transition plan in place," he explained. "Elle will have a team of trusted advisors guiding her as she assumes her role as CEO. The board has already been informed, and all legal documents have been finalized." Relief washed over me. Grandpa had planned for this. He knew they'd try to manipulate me to back me into a corner, but he had made sure I wouldn't be alone. Richard's expression soured, the last of his fake charm draining away. He leaned in close to my mother, lowering his voice. "Not enough. We can fight this." The lawyer turned to him, his tone clipped. "You can't." Richard stiffened. "The will is airtight," the lawyer continued. "Legally, there is nothing to contest." That was it. Checkmate. I watched as my mother's carefully constructed world collapsed around her. For years she had dismissed me, underestimated me, treated me like an inconvenience. She had never once considered the possibility that she wouldn't be the one pulling the strings. Now, she had nothing. The betrayal in her eyes wasn't because she had lost the company. It was because she had lost control. "You're making a mistake," she finally bit out, grasping at the last threads of her pride. "You think this is a win? Running a corporation isn't a game at all. You're going to fail." I met her gaze unshaken. Then, with deliberate slowness, I leaned forward, letting a small, knowing smile creep onto my lips. I guess we'll see, won't we? The tension in the room was thick, suffocating. And for the first time I was the one in control. My mother's glare bore into me, her perfectly manicured fingers curling into fists on the polished oak table. Richard sat stiffly beside her, his jaw clenched as if he were holding back a tirade. I could almost hear their thoughts. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. I had been the inconvenience in their perfect plan. The naive girl, they could push aside the easy target. They could manipulate, but Grandpa had seen through them. And that's why he had chosen me. This doesn't make sense, my mother finally said, voice shaking with anger. Dad would never do this to me. I was his only daughter. Why would he cut me out of everything? I turned to the lawyer, wondering the same thing. Grandpa and I had always been close, but even I hadn't expected him to leave her with nothing. The lawyer gave a measured sigh and folded his hands on the table. Mr. Whitmore left a letter explaining his decision. He instructed that I read it in the event of any confusion. He pulled a sealed envelope from his briefcase and carefully opened it. I watched my mother shift uneasily in her seat. The lawyer read aloud, "If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. And by now I'm sure your mother is outraged. She'll call it unfair. She'll claim she was supposed to inherit everything. But the truth is, she lost that right a long time ago." I glanced at my mother. Her lips had pressed together in a hard line, her face unreadable. Your mother always thought money meant power, but she never understood that. Power requires responsibility. When she was younger, I gave her a chance after chance to prove herself, worthy of running the family business. Instead, she spent decades trying to take shortcuts, choosing luxury over leadership, selfishness over sacrifice. The lawyer continued reading. She always believed that being my daughter entitled her to my fortune. But entitlement isn't the same as earning something. And as for Richard, if he's in the room right now, I imagine he's trying to hide his true colors. But I know what he is. A leech. A man who saw an opportunity in my daughter's bank account and took it. I won't let my life's work fall into his hands. Richard's face turned beet red. I could see his rage simmering, but he stayed silent. You are different. The letter pressed on each word, carving deeper into the moment. You never asked for anything from me. And that's exactly why I chose you. You worked for it. You took the time to understand the business. Not as a bank account, but as a legacy. I watched you grow, and I knew. You are the only one I can trust to protect what I built. My pulse thundered in my ears. He had seen me all those summers spent by his side, absorbing everything. Jotting down notes, listening, learning, while my mother dismissed my curiosity as nothing more than a passing distraction. But Grandpa had been watching the whole time. The lawyer continued, his voice unwavering. I know this won't be easy. Your mother will fight you. Richard will try to control you, but don't forget I didn't leave you defenseless. I left you with everything you need to win. A finality settled over the room as the lawyer folded the letter with quiet precision, slipping it back into the envelope. The silence that followed was suffocating across for me. My mother sat motionless, her entire body trembling, not with grief, but with humiliation rage. This is ridiculous, she hissed, her voice sharp as glass. He was old, sick. He wasn't thinking straight when he wrote that. Well, the lawyer met her glare with absolute calm. Actually, he said smoothly, Mr. Whitmore revised his will just 3 months ago. He was of completely sound mind, and legally there is nothing you can do to contest it. Richard shot to his feet, nearly knocking his chair over. This is a waste of time, he growled. Let's go. But my mother didn't budge. She sat there staring at me, her expression unreadable. Then, in a voice ice cold and cutting, she asked, You really think you can handle this and hesitate? Yes. That night sleep barely came. I wasn't afraid, exactly. But the enormity of it, owning an empire overnight, stepping into a role I'd never even had time to prepare for, settled over me like a storm cloud. But Grandpa had believed in me, and that was enough. By morning, I was standing in front of Whitmore Industries for the first official board meeting since the will had been read. True to his word, Grandpa's trusted advisors were already waiting inside. I wasn't alone. I took a deep breath, preparing myself to step forward. Then from behind me, I turned. Standing by the entrance were my mother and Richard. Their faces were carefully composed. The storm of yesterday, hidden behind smooth, measured expression lines. "We need to talk," my mother said, her tone eerily calm. "Just the three of us," Richard added. "No lawyers, no board members, just family." I didn't move. I already knew this wasn't about family. This was their last, desperate attempt to take what wasn't theirs. And I wasn't about to let them win. I stood at the entrance of my company's headquarters, studying my mother and Richard as they blocked my path. They had already lost the legal fight. The will was airtight. They couldn't seize the company from me through force or manipulation. In a courtroom. So now they were resorting to something else. Negotiation. This was their last shot at control. "We need to talk," my mother said again, her voice unsettlingly smooth. I exhaled slowly. I wasn't scared of them anymore. "Talk then," I said flatly. Richard glanced around, lowering his voice as if we were conspiring. "Not here, somewhere private." I should have walked away. I should have ignored them entirely. But a part of me wanted to hear what pathetic excuse they would make next. So I nodded. "Fine. 5 minutes." We ended up in a small conference room within the building. Richard sank into a chair, like he belonged there, while my mother remained standing, arms crossed tight over her chest, watching me like a predator, sizing up its prey. "You're in over your head, Elle," she began, her voice softer now, almost gentle. "Grandpa, I put an impossible burden on you. It's unfair to expect you to run $1 billion empire at your age." I smirked. "And you think Richard should run it instead?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "At least for now. He has experience. You could learn from him." I let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, I see. You want me to hand everything over and step aside like a good little girl?" Richard leaned in, his polished, insincere smile firmly in place. "Not exactly," he said smoothly. "We're proposing a partnership." I arched an eyebrow. "A partnership? You'll still be the face of the company," he assured me. "You'll still have the title. But I'll handle the day-to-day operations, the real work. You won't have to deal with the pressure. No board meetings, no tough decisions. You can just enjoy your life." I stared at him. "You want me to be a figurehead? It's the best arrangement." My mother chimed in. "The board will feel more secure, and you won't have to deal with the stress of making mistakes. You're still so young, Ollie. One wrong decision, and you could destroy everything your grandfather built up there." It was the manipulation, the veiled insults wrapped in fake concern, the fear tactics dressed up as wisdom. I leaned back in my chair, completely unimpressed. "And what exactly do I get out of this?" Richard's smile widened as if he had just won a substantial payout. He said smoothly, "We'll transfer a percentage of the company's revenue into your personal account every month. You'll never have to worry about money. You can travel, relax, do whatever makes you happy. And the company, it stays successful. Successful for them." I let the silence stretch, watching them as they sat there, convinced they were closing the deal. They had no idea what was coming next. It was almost admirable how convinced they were that this plan would work. They actually believed I would fold, that I would just hand over everything, and let them pull the strings behind the scenes. I let the silence stretch, pretending to consider it. Then I asked, "And what happens if I say no?" My mother's face darkened. "Elle, don't be reckless." I arched an eyebrow, meaning her voice was measured. "Deliberate, meaning you'll make enemies. The board doesn't trust you. The shareholders will scrutinize your every move. If you refuse to work with us, we won't shield you from the pressure." I tilted my head, my expression neutral. "You mean you'll sabotage me?" Richard smirked. He didn't deny it. I let out a slow, steady breath before rising from my seat. "Thanks for the offer," I said, my voice unwavering. "But I'll take my chances." My mother shot up from her chair. "Elle, don't do this." I turned toward the door, but before I could leave, she grabbed my wrist. Her grip was firm, almost desperate. "Do you really think you can win?" she hissed. "You have no idea how this world works. You think Grandpa did you a favor by giving you this company? No. He put a target on your back. The board will tear you apart. The investors will bury you. You need us." I held her gaze, my voice calm but cutting. "No, Mom," I said quietly. "I needed you. When I was a kid, I needed you to believe in me. But you never did. You wanted me to fail just so you could take what wasn't yours. But I'm not a scared little girl anymore. For the first time, she flinched. Richard stood abruptly, his patience finally snapped. You're making a huge mistake, Ella, he warned. Don't come crawling back when it all blows up in your face. I smiled, I won't. Then I walked out, leaving them both behind for good. I knew they wouldn't go down easily, and I was right. The first attack came 2 days later. I walked into my first official board meeting as CEO fully, expecting resistance, but I wasn't prepared for an all-out ambush. The moment I took my seat at the head of the long mahogany table, I could feel it. The shift in the air, the quiet hostility. The board members, mostly men in their 50s and 60s who had worked under my grandfather for decades, stared at me with barely concealed skepticism. I barely had time to greet them before one of them. Mr. Holloway leaned forward, his expression tight. Oh, before we begin, he said, his voice heavy with expectation, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. I rested my hands on the table, keeping my expression composed. And what exactly is the elephant in the room, Mr. Holloway hesitated before exchanging knowing glances with the other board members. Finally, he straightened his posture and spoke. Your grandfather was a brilliant man. But let's be honest, his decision to hand you the company was made in haste. You lack the experience. And frankly, that concerns us. I expected resistance, but hearing it so openly still sent a sharp pang through my chest. Concerned about what? I asked. Your ability to lead, he stated bluntly. Across the room, Mr. Langston barely looked up from his phone before exhaling. The media is already on this. My stomach tightened as I discreetly pulled out my phone. The headlines hit me like a sledgehammer. Billion-dollar gamble. Can L. Whitmore keep Whitmore Industries afloat? Industry experts predict catastrophic collapse under inexperienced CEO. This wasn't an accident. This was sabotage. By the time the meeting ended, my PR team had left multiple frantic messages. Investors were panicking. Stocks had dropped. Someone inside the company had leaked the story. Then I saw an email request for a leadership vote. My mother and Richard were making their move. They had planted doubt, manipulated investors, and now they were trying to push me out before I even had the chance to fight back. I should have panicked. I should have felt overwhelmed. Instead, I smiled because I had been waiting for this. I grabbed my phone and dialed the one person who could help me turn the tables. It rang twice before a smooth, familiar voice answered. I was wondering when you'd call. I exhaled. I need your help. Lucas Sinclair, my grandfather's most trusted business partner. A financial mastermind. A man who had once saved a failing company and turned it into $1 billion empire. And more importantly, someone who despised my mother and Richard just as much as I did. This about the media circus? He asked, amusement lacing his voice. You assume correctly. And the board? They're holding a vote in 2 days. Lucas hummed. Classic corporate betrayal. Well, it's time we remind them why your grandfather chose you. That night in Lucas's sleek, glass-walled office overlooking the city, we built a plan. Step 1, the board trap. Key investors, still loyal to my grandfather, would publicly endorse me. Step 2, the media counterattack. An exclusive interview showcasing my qualifications and my grandfather's reasoning. Step 3, exposing the sabotage. Lucas had contacts who could trace the media leaks. If my mother and Richard were behind them, we'd make sure the world knew. By midnight, our plan was airtight. I shook Lucas's hand. Thank you. He grinned. Don't thank me yet. Wait until we see their faces. By the next morning, the headlines had changed. CEO Al Whitmore breaks silence. Exclusive interview airs tonight. Whitmore Industries, stock stabilizes as investors rally behind leadership. Who was behind the smear campaign? Corporate backstabbing exposed. I sat at my desk watching the narrative shift. The tide was turning in my favor, but I wasn't naive. This wasn't over. Richard and my mother wouldn't just sit back and watch their power grab crumble. They would fight dirtier than ever, and I had to be ready. The morning of the board vote arrived. Standing outside Whitmore Industries, I looked up at the towering glass building. My company, my legacy today would determine everything. Either I would prove my grandfather had chosen wisely, or I would be forced out before I ever got the chance to lead. Inside, the boardroom was crowded, every seat filled with powerful men and women who had once sworn loyalty to my grandfather. At the head of a table sat Mr. Holloway, the same man who had openly questioned my leadership. "We'll begin with a vote," he announced. Before he could continue, the door swung open. Richard and my mother strode in right on cue. Richard cleared his throat, his posture already using authority. "Let's be honest," he said, flashing the room a well-rehearsed smile. "Running $1 billion empire requires experience." I didn't flinch because I was ready for them. Richard paced the room like a politician, delivering a well-rehearsed speech. "We must prioritize what's best for the company," he declared. "I have the experience. I understand the business. I have a vision for its future. That's why I propose that I take over as CEO, while L remains the public face of Whitmore Industries." Then, as if the decision had already been made, he sat down, his smirk unmistakable. I let the silence stretch, watching him bask in his own delusion. Then I spoke. "That's interesting, Richard," I said smoothly, "because I remember you saying something very different behind closed doors." His face twitched. "Excuse me?" I glanced at Lucas, who was seated beside me. Without a word, he slid a thick folder across the table. "Over the past week, Richard, and my mother have been actively sabotaging my leadership," I stated. But they didn't stop at leaking false press. They also tried to weaken Whitmore Industries itself. The board members flipped through the documents. Emails, text messages, even call transcripts. Mr. Holloway's expression darkened. "What is this proof?" Lucas said smoothly. "Proof that Richard has been working against the company. He never intended to say that he intended to exploit it." Richard's face burned red. "This is outrageous. You can't prove." "Oh, but we can," I interrupted. "We also traced the media leaks." "And guess what?" I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence. "The source of the media leaks. It came from a private email, one registered under Richard's name." The boardroom erupted in murmurs across the table. My mother shot to her feet, her glare sharp enough to cut glass. "Elle, that's enough," she snapped, her voice high with desperation. "You're being ridiculous. You're just trying to make him look bad, because you're scared." I let out a slow, knowing smile. "I don't have to make him look bad, Mom," I said calmly. "He did that all on his own." She opened her mouth, but before she could spit another excuse, Mr. Holloway slammed his hand on the table. "That's enough." His voice was cold. Final turning to Richard, his expression hardened with disgust. "You weren't trying to protect this company," he said, his voice laced with contempt. "You were actively working against it. That alone disqualifies you from any leadership position." I leaned back, watching the panic settle into Richard's face for the first time. He understood he had lost. "It's time to vote," Mr. Holloway announced. The board members exchanged glances. Then, one by one, hands went up in my favor. The final count, unanimous. I was officially recognized as the rightful CEO of Whitmore Industries. I exhaled my chest, lighter than it had been in weeks. It was over. Security escorted Richard out of the building within the hour. My mother followed, humiliated, but not before hissing her final words. "You'll regret this hour." I didn't respond because the truth was, the only thing I regretted was trusting her for as long as I did. That night, Lucas leaned against my desk, his smirk satisfied. "You did good, kid." His eyes gleamed with approval. "Your grandfather would be proud." I smiled. "Thanks, Lucas, for everything." He shrugged. "Don't mention it. Now go celebrate. You earned it." 1 year later, I stood behind a podium addressing a packed room. When my grandfather chose me to lead Whitmore Industries, people doubted me. My voice was strong, steady. The headline, L. Whitmore, the CEO who proved them all wrong. I met the audience's gaze. But what they didn't realize, I continued, is that success isn't about age. It's about preparation, perseverance, and the ability to rise, even when people expect you to fall. The crowd erupted into applause, and I smiled, because I had won, and I had built a legacy of my own.